We'll be administering the Regional Early Action Planning, or what we call REAP 2.0 program for the Fresno region. And we'll dive right into it. Next slide, please. So REAP, to begin with, is anticipated to bring about $13.6 million to our region. This is intended to help accelerate progress towards state housing goals, and as well as climate commitments to help us deal with the housing crisis, while at the same time addressing our climate goals, and hopefully to help address reductions in what we call vehicle miles traveled, specifically through a strengthened partnership among the state, its regions, and our local governments. So this is state funding that is born out of the state budget that is being handled through the State Housing and Community Development Department in conjunction with several other agencies, and going to each region individually. Next slide, please. So specifically, what this program seeks to do is achieve fundamentally 5 different goals. Accelerate infill housing development. By infill, we're talking primarily about like multifamily units. Think in terms of apartments and townhouses. That's a little more concentrated than the typical single family home development that is perhaps more common in areas like Fresno. To reduce vehicle miles traveled, and by that we're talking about the number of miles traveled in individual vehicles, and specifically those miles traveled by individual drivers as opposed to carpools, for example. To increase housing supply at all affordability levels, to affirmatively further fair housing, which in this case we're talking about the notion of ensuring that housing needs are met across multiple different spectrums, demographic spectrums, income, in terms of meeting specifically with regard to income, ethnicity, disadvantaged communities, that proactive efforts are put into place to address affordability concerns with regard to housing in our region. And then also finally, to help implement our adopted regional and local plans to achieve these goals. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background. Again, as I mentioned, the program was established as part of the 2021 California Comeback Plan, the budget plan under AB 140. There was an earlier, you may have figured this out, by virtue of there being a REAP 2.0, it implies there was a REAP 1.0, and you're absolutely right. REAP 1.0 was primarily a planning program that was divided up among individual cities within the state, and then regional government organizations like Fresno Council of Governments, which is a regional transportation planning agency. So our experience and in housing, our experience and work in housing is limited to assigning, or has been historically limited to assigning housing numbers to the jurisdictions, but the state is having us get more involved through grants like the REAP 1 and 2 grants. So it expands on, REAP 2.0 expands on the work in the original REAP grant by integrating housing and climate goals specifically, and allowing for broader infrastructure investments. So REAP 1.0 was more particular to planning efforts as opposed to actual infrastructure investments. And so that's what we're talking about here is REAP 2.0 is not just limited to planning. We can actually build with this money. Next slide, please. So the key word here is transformative. And we're going to talk about that quite a bit. Transformative, transformational, another way of expressing it. $510 million statewide going into REAP 2.0, with 13 million of that in Fresno County after Fresno COG takes a share for program management and its public outreach, of which this is our very first meeting. There will be plenty more to come. But transformative policy outcomes, this is what the state is looking for from this funding, transformative policy outcomes and projects and programs that accelerate regional and local plans to achieve state priority planning goals. And again, those planning goals on multiple fronts, primarily with regard to housing affordability and a reduction in what we call greenhouse gases. You know, those climate warming gases that the transportation sector is responsible for approximately 40% of our climate warming gases in this state. And so this program attempts to bridge both of those goals and achieve each simultaneously. Next slide, please. So as we've discussed, how is it going to do that? How does it achieve both housing and transportation related goals? Again, by accelerating infill housing, that multi-unit, multi-family housing that we discussed, both the supply, the choice, and the affordability of it, to affirmatively further fair housing. So again, that is to reach across demographic expanses to accommodate housing regardless of income level, and then to also reduce vehicle miles traveled, again to hopefully provide for housing that affords more opportunities to walk, to bicycle, to use transit, public transit, these kinds of endeavors. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, this funding is primarily administered through the Housing and Community Development Department, but is also has its guidelines and is being developed in coordination with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the California Strategic Growth Council, and the California Air Resources Board. So that's 4 separate state agencies working in coordination and conjunction to develop the guidelines and to approve these applications. And I should note that the applications are ministerial in the sense that as long as the projects that we propose meet the state criteria that's been established in the guidelines, then we are fundamentally entitled to the funds. There's no real competitive nature to this program. We're not competing, so to speak, with other areas of the state, the Bay Area or Southern California. There's no competition sense in it. So as long as the projects that we propose hit the marks, we can be assured of the funds going forward. Next slide. So what does all that mean? So to give you an idea of some of the eligible uses, and these come directly out of the guidelines as they're stated by the Housing and Community Development, or HCD, department. We're talking about technical assistance in terms of planning, staffing, and consultant needs, administration costs, outreach, and engagement activities, which is much of what Fresno COG's share is coming from. But then more directly, in terms of accelerating infill development, as we mentioned, that improves housing supply, realizing multimodal communities through programs, plans, and implementation actions. What does that mean? So to realize multimodal communities, these would be efforts that would help improve transit ridership, to help build additional transportation connections, perhaps between neighborhoods or among developments, that would increase not only the density of and affordability of housing, but also in terms of their connectedness to the community at large, that don't require a vehicle, a car for every single trip. Shifting travel behavior by reducing driving through programs, ordinances, funds, as we just mentioned, and increasing transit ridership. So again, you start seeing the common theme of linking the housing and the affordability of housing with reducing the passenger miles, the vehicle miles traveled in our transportation network. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we do have eligible activities under technical assistance that may be broad, but they have to reach all REAP 2.0 objectives. And when we talk about technical assistance, we're talking primarily about technical assistance to local cities, local jurisdictions, cities, the county, and then perhaps nonprofits that may submit projects for consideration, or assistance in developing projects themselves. But those projects, and this is where the rubber starts meeting the road. Eligible activities must have a significant region-wide benefit and are not intended to fund projects that are relatively small in scope. So that is to say that while housing is an eligible expense, the potential for a specific development to receive REAP 2.0 funds is probably pretty limited, unless that that development has some sort of regional scope or benefit that goes beyond simply accommodating the people who would live in that development. And that's where things get a little more complicated. Next slide, please. So we have a variety of ineligible uses. You know, when we talk about eligible uses, again, we're talking primarily about local governments, cities, the county, and certain nonprofit entities that would be eligible to receive these funds primarily. There may be other eligible recipients we'd have to see based on the types of projects that are submitted. But we do know across the board what some of the ineligible uses of the funds would be, and those are spelled out here. I'll give you just a second to look at those. I don't need to go through them individually, but you can see, for example, real estate brokerage fees, multiple different types of fees are payment of fees are ineligible, highway or roadway capacity increases ineligible, and so on. Next slide, please. And there's another list here. You can see, again, a number of ineligible uses that we cannot use the fund on, including operations, which is an important point. This is for capital expenditures. And so this would not be intended for operating funds, and not intended for parking. Okay, so significant beneficial impact. So again, this is where things start getting complicated. What defines significant beneficial impact? What exactly is the state looking for from a typical or an awarded REAP 2.0 project? And so basically, we are responsible as the administering agency, the Fresno Council of Governments, to demonstrate that each proposed use advances all REAP 2.0 programs, goals, and objectives, and meets the definition of transformative planning and implementation, and provides a significant beneficial impact. And so in order to do that, there are metrics that are attached. There are measures that are quantifiable, they're observable, and they're measurable that we have to be able to meet. But we can choose which metrics to use within a certain range. And that's going to be a big part of our later discussion, and the input that we hope that you'll provide today is what some of those metrics could be. So, for example, rates of change, such as percent increases or decreases over or under a particular baseline, a magnitude of impact relative to some variable or target. That would be another metric that could be used. Proportion of need achieved, impact relative to past trends, policies, and practices. So we get to design the methodology and the guidelines ultimately that these metrics will inform. But we do have to be, we are beholden to state interests in designing those guidelines and choosing the metrics that we're going to use in order to be able to definitively measure progress in this case. And so that's going to be probably the biggest trick for all this is how to judge potential eligible projects based on those metrics, and what metrics should we use? What metrics are the best metrics to use? To what measures should be considered and should be prioritized? Next slide, please. So some targets that or variables that we might consider would be benefiting households by income group, for example, housing units, new construction, a preservation or a rehabilitation. We could use density as a measure. We could use infrastructure, the infrastructure that is necessary prior to development being built, sewers, water, those types of improvements, infrastructure capacity and accessibility, public space, parkland, are there opportunities there, community amenities, different investments, not to forget vehicle miles traveled reduction goals that we're looking at, the idea of attempting to reduce vehicle miles traveled by a certain amount, which we can actually model mathematically through a model that we have and use widely here at Fresno COG. Regional or local equity policies and programs that are included in our adopted regional transportation plan, we call it the RTP, and our sustainable community strategy, or the SCS. So these are long-range transportation and land use plans that are designed to provide an aspirational look at where we hope to be our transportation network and its integration with land use into the future, as far ahead as 20 or 25 years. So the policies and programs that exist in those documents, are there ways to meet those? GHG, greenhouse gas reduction goals or targets, again, those climate warming gases, are there ways to measure through our efforts here reductions in those types of gases? Moving on. Next slide. Okay, so that leads us to where we stand today and what the process is going to be. As we sit here today, Fresno COG has already filed what's known as its initial application, which allows us under the REAP 2.0 guidelines, we're allowed to file for up to 10% of funding in advance of what is to be our final application. We have submitted that application and have received an award letter to the tune of about $600,000. Again, this is primarily intended for our public outreach efforts on REAP 2.0, as well as our program administration costs. It amounts to about 5% of our total, which preserves as much funding as possible for our sustainable community strategy implementation, which is, again, part of the REAP goal. The advanced funding, as I mentioned, used for education and outreach, beginning with workshops like tonight's meeting, and there will be many others. And then this will all lead up to our full application, which at a minimum will spell out the policies and guidelines that Fresno will use to prioritize and select REAP 2.0 projects for funding. And this is going to have to be turned in some form by December 31st. So we don't anticipate by any stretch knowing what projects will be funded by the end of the year, but we are hoping to have a pretty good grasp of what our methodology for selecting those projects ultimately will be by December 31st, by the end of the year. We hope to have that, and certainly will be taking hopefully your input tonight and in the very near future on how to go about that. Next slide, please. So with regard to our, at least our beginning stakeholder and public engagement, This is the first of 2 virtual sessions. We are kind of splitting this up. We do have a specific stakeholders group that was also heavily involved in developing our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy, or the RTPSCS that I mentioned before. They are a broad group of stakeholders across multiple disciplines and organizations throughout the county. They are weighing in on this as well. They've already received this presentation ahead of you, and you will be following pretty closely, and they will be informed of the kinds of input that you provide as we go through to shape the methodology and ultimately the guidelines for this program. We also will be hosting, I mentioned that the 2 stakeholder groups. So we'll be having the 2 public information sessions, the first of which is tonight. The next is tomorrow at noon. So we will present this same presentation tomorrow at noon. We talked about the stakeholder groups. We also will be partnering with our community-based network of community-based organizations to try and incentivize additional outreach through those once we receive our initial funding from the first REAP application that we've already been approved or had approved. And then finally, we will have a public survey online through publicinput.com that is going to be available very, very soon, if not already online, to allow people to comment and provide their suggestions, again, toward these metrics, the methodology, and the guidelines. Next slide. So we provided the application in September. It was revised in October, and we have been awarded the initial application. The full application, as I mentioned, due December 31st. We anticipate that there is going to be additional revisions to that full final application, probably in the January-February timeframe. We hope to have projects selected somewhere in the March and April timeframe. So a call for projects going out presumably in the late winter, early spring of next year, with a selection process that we anticipate sometime in mid to late spring of next year. And then sometime, and it's very, very difficult to predict this because of workflow, that sometime between summer and fall of next year, that we would have a master funding agreement, as it's known, in place with the state agencies, so that we can begin suballocating the funding that Fresno COG receives. Next slide. Okay, so in our discussions through our state with our state partners and through other organizations, other regional agencies like ours who have also filed applications, what have we learned to date in terms of filing our first application? Number one, that we should focus our attention on a combination of affordable housing and reduced vehicle miles traveled. Again, that reduction of specifically individual car trips, that projects should probably not lean too far in one direction or the other. The goal here is to attempt to achieve both simultaneously, and that while implementation and planning are both eligible for in terms of the types of projects that we're able to fund, implementation is actually the bigger consideration for REAP 2.0. Again, REAP 1.0 dealt more with the planning side. So that's not to say that we can't use REAP 2.0 for any planning projects, but the likelihood is that implementation projects are going to get probably the bigger priority, certainly from the state, than they would planning. And again, transformational being the key term. So while we have assurances of a wide degree of flexibility within the framework of the state goals, We do know that individual projects, the notion of like gap funding, I've got a project, you know, a city has a project, or a nonprofit organization has a housing project that is $1 million short of the funding it needs to be built. That fact alone is not something that's considered transformational. And so probably not something that would be prioritized within the framework of this program. So a good example of that point is a comment that the Santa Barbara Association of Governments received on its application, that noted the call for projects appears to allow for the funding of production of housing units, which is not the intention of this program, which is to fund areas, not individual projects or gap financing, unless some other things can be demonstrated, such as significant beneficial impact. So that was a comment that Santa Barbara received on its application when it filed its final application. And so we took notice of that, and certainly are very aware of that as we prepare ours. Next slide. So for our December 31st application, we will submit the framework for the guidelines. Again, probably not going to be the final product. We do anticipate revisions and alterations, but hopefully a pretty good handle on what those guidelines, the methodology, and the proposed metrics will be for project selection. The remaining meetings, both for the public and the stakeholders, will focus on building consensus on those metrics. So we're going to be asking you a series of questions below that we hope you'll answer. And all you'd have to do is at this point is when we begin this process, you can raise your hand and we'll allow you to speak. We're happy to enter into a dialogue on this. Or if you prefer, we can run a poll so that you can cast your vote anonymously. We have that capability as well. So we hope to engage you and receive your comments tonight. We have Brenda, Ophelia, Denise standing by to take your comments and jot those down. Those comments will be taken into consideration by our staff and also by our stakeholders group. So why don't we go ahead and start with the next slide, the first question. So the money here can be spent in two different ways. What activities do you think you want to see the money spent for? Should it be used on regional and local plans to achieve the program goals, or should it be used primarily for paying for projects to be built, or both planning and implementation? So what appeals to you more? And I'm happy to open up the line for anyone who would like to speak. All you have to do is raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go. We do have a hand. Mr. Hayes. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
I think you have to unmute me.
Nope. We can hear you, sir.
Oh, very good. Yeah, I'm up in Albury. I'm amazed I'm able to participate. And also thank you for the opportunity.
Of course.
Thank you. I have a kind of a general question. So COG, Council of Governments, and what the opportunity is here under REAP 2.0. Fresno County is also going under, right now it's undergoing a general plan review. And my question is there any parallel activities or interactions as it relates to the county's general plan update and how this may run parallel or complement that larger, let's say, undertaking? And then a second question that I have is when talking about regional and local plans, under the general plan, and again, I'm talking about up in the foothill and mountain areas of eastern Fresno County. I think it's called the North Sierra Regional Plan, and it's been in place since the 1980s and probably is rather out of date. And just curious to what extent REAP 2.0 would allow for community involvement, let's say, where we're looking at a refresh as it relates to regional and local plans. So I see a lot of opportunity, but I'm not quite certain how it can all connect and complement each other, if at all.
Sure. So I can go ahead and answer as best I can. If I fail to respond to a point that you've asked or made, just let me know. Number one, with regard to REAP's interaction with the general plan update process at the county level, I can tell you that I have been in contact with the county on the potential for eligible projects. We actually have been approached, Fresno COG has been approached by multiple parties, but typically with regard to specific projects, and that's what I was trying to convey in this presentation, is that when it comes to very, very specific developments, there may be some issues there because of the requirements that the state has issued and kind of the fence that they've put around REAP and the way in which we produce our guidelines and our methodology because of that transformational requirement. And so, I'll intersect that response to your second question with regard to the potential for additional planning in the Eastern Sierra, in that, again, because there's a greater emphasis in this program on implementation versus planning, and because the nature of this program is to have a region-wide impact, there's some question. I'm not saying no out of hand. I can't say that, but there would be presumably some pretty high hurdles that the Eastern Sierra planning would need to meet in order to be able to justify it, because it would have to hit the metrics, whatever measurements we establish, to reduce VMT, and or improve affordable housing, or maybe vice versa. But that potentially could happen if the planning, if the documents produced also produced policies that everyone agreed to, that going forward, only certain types of developments would be allowed. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities here. That's where that flexibility comes in. That there is certainly the potential there. But by virtue of the transformational requirement, and also that guidance that we've received about planning versus implementation, those are kind of two guiding points for us, I think, that are very important to pay attention to. So I don't want to overcommit, but I also don't want to discourage the possibility. It's difficult to say until we establish the metrics. So I can tell you that when we asked this, well, I'll wait on that. We have some other comments. Mr. Hayes, did I answer your question, sir?
Yeah, you did a good job handling that. There are two key words. I think transformational was one of them, and the other is potential. I think if you're looking at even in rural communities, unincorporated communities, that those same principles can be applied just as much as in semi-rural or urban areas.
Right.
And incorporated communities. Yeah. Thank you very much.
We can absolutely, and I think we can absolutely agree on that. I do think that there may be questions about affordability and accessibility to services. That may be a part of the equation as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'm sorry. I think you're more than welcome, sir. Thank you for the question. And I think we had Sylvester Hall. I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself when you're ready.
Good evening, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Phipps, if you will.
Thank you. Good evening.
And also thank you to the Fresno,
Fresno Cog?
COG organization, if you will.
bet.
You guys are fantastic organization
Thank you.
and really set a great tone for, you know, the community and the developers and the various agencies and institutions and municipalities to work together and understand what processes need to take place in order for a project to happen. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Now you're talking to my good ear. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yes, and my name is Sylvester Hall. I'm a transformative social, economic, cultural, strategic planner. I am one of the principals of the West Creek Village Development Project in Southwest Fresno, which is a transformative climate communities project area, along with 2 Strategic Growth Council projects underway, the State Community College District West Fresno campus and the West Creek Village Community Park, if you will. However, I'm also one of the principal and master developer of that project, and it is indeed a transformative project. And we have 8 different components to that project. Of course, the construction and design is underway as we speak, and we're in agreement with the city, and you guys approved our land uses, by the way, okay? So thank you so much for that. But in addition to answering your question, I believe that funding, and believe me, from a very sound strategic analysis that we've been able to do over the last 10 years or so, as we looked at affordable housing throughout the country, and it's particularly in California and here in the Central Valley. That's why we earmarked our West Creek Village Development Project with 290 units of low income, affordable, and market rate units. In addition to that, a condominium component. And we also have a single family home component as well to address all housing needs, if you will, Mr. Phipps. So with that being said, with respect to our low income and affordable multifamily component, we've understood the need for funding for both planning and implementation. For instance, if you will, you know, to produce 97 units, we're looking at about $65 million in total development costs. Of course, you know, a lot of that is divided between hard cost and soft costs. But the preliminary planning phases of these projects, you know, are very costly. And the architectural and engineering areas, if you will, and the, you know, the pre-planning phases, if you will, the pre-development phases, but also in the implementation phases as well in hard costs and construction costs. So with that being said, we have a real live project underway right now. Of course, we've been fortunate enough to be working with the Strategic Growth Council over the last 5-6 years through our TCC projects ongoing in Southwest Fresno. That was my plan, if you will, sir. And right now we positioned ourselves to work with the Strategic Growth Council Affordable Housing and Sustainable Community Program. We've already been assigned a technical assistant for that particular project. Also, we're working with the California Tax Allocation program funding process, the LIHTC process. But even with all those tools, Mr. Phipps, we still find the need for pre-development funding. And so I would like to say to you, from our perspective and from a strategic perspective, because there's so many diverse approaches now to address the affordable housing crisis in California and also in America, that we have to have a diverse resources available. So I would recommend both planning and implementation funding availability through this particular program. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you bet. I appreciate it. Thank you for the comment. Yeah. Yeah, very good. That's the kind of information we need. So your vote is solidly for both, and we absolutely will take note of that. Are there thank you again. Are there other comments at this time? Why don't we do this just for grins? Why don't we go ahead and open it up? We'll go ahead and open the poll just so everybody has a chance to give us an opinion. You don't necessarily have to say anything, but we're very, very curious about what you think on these questions. So if you'll, Denise, if you can open the poll for us here. So we'll give everybody just a couple of minutes to vote on this. We're just really curious to know what you think. We don't mean to take more time than necessary. We know your time is valuable, but we do need our input on this. So please tell us what you think. There will be other opportunities certainly for. Oh, and in fact, we have one. I have a Susanna Herrera. Go right ahead, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. I'm Susanna. I am from the city of Clovis, and I had a question. You mentioned it's 13 million for the region. Is this annually or it's a one-time?
It's a one-time, yeah. So
Okay.
and like I said, I just full disclosure, completely full disclosure. It's actually 13.6. Our initial application was for the 600,000 that covers the program administration, the management, and the outreach. So
Okay.
that leaves about 13. That leaves roughly 13 million that will actually be distributed or suballocated.
Okay, and the reason I ask that question is because I think it is important to consider when answering this question, because planning, if you incorporate planning and implementation for $13 million, I don't know how far $13 million will go.
That's
versus
right.
if you just do it for implementation or planning. So just, which is why I wanted to know that answer. Thank you so much.
We have had the same thought, Ms. Herrera. Thank you. Yes, that has absolutely occurred to us as well. Very quickly, I do want to note, we're going to go ahead and end the poll at this point so you can see the results here. We have both planning and projects. We appreciate that. Second place there with 3 out of 9 is paying for projects to be built or implementation. So thank you. We will absolutely note this. This will be included in our application. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next question. Denise, if you would. There we go. So which of the following would you like to use the state funds for? And please, you're welcome to pick more than one, but we ask that you not pick more than 2. If you can limit your choice to one to help us prioritize, that would be fantastic. So would you like to see existing communities and neighborhoods more compact to increase housing supply, choice, and affordability, to create walkable and bikeable communities, to develop programs that enable you to do activities with less driving, or build accessible, reliable, and more connected transit systems? So we're asking for your input on this. Denise, if you'll throw up the poll on this one. And I do want to open up the lines if there's anyone who would like to address this point or any others while we're at it. Just feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Okay, it looks like we have 7 people so far. I'm going to give it one more minute. If anyone else would like to register their vote. Just one more. We just need one more. And we will move on. Going once. Going twice. Okay, so here's the result. Making communities and existing neighborhoods more compact to increase housing supply choice and affordability. Kind of the big winner with 90% there. Second place, creating walking and bikeable communities. So we will again note that. Thank you for the input. And please do again chime in at any time. Raise your hand and we'll be happy to call on you. So this is kind of an open-ended question. Not kind of, it is. What is the best way to develop a compact community or neighborhood with affordable housing choices that requires less driving to get around? And what we're asking here is, again, kind of a variation of the same question we've already asked a couple of times, which is, how would you spend the money? You know, do you think that we should concentrate on, for example, on a single project? Do you think we should concentrate on the infrastructure to develop multiple projects, for example? You know, what would be the most transformational? What metrics should we be considering? Denise, do you want to put up the poll on this? And so by all means, I think you have the opportunity to type out a short answer, or we can take your response live if you'd care to raise your hand. Please be our guest. Happy to unmute anyone who'd like to speak on this. Please don't be shy. Mr. Hall, go ahead and unmute, sir.
Yes, Mr. Phipps, I'd like to take this opportunity to express some of our master planning approaches to resolving some of the devastating neighborhoods that have been created, you know, throughout America, you know, through redlining and all the other discriminatory practices in terms of developing cities. Because the West Creek Village Development Project is becoming a national model for the country. The $13 million that you guys are working with, you know, is not going to address this this particular, you know, model cost, you know, structure, but
not entirely. Yes.
Yeah, this is the basis of what has to be done in these communities that you're speaking about, and these communities across the country has been studied by our you know, our municipalities and what have you, and everyone knows that we've created a lot of urban sprawl, and that's why a lot of our attendees tonight had responses about creating more compact, more walkable bicycle communities. And so what we've discovered we like to do in some of these degraded communities and some of these communities that have suffered from greenhouse gas, you know, polluting, you know, planning, land use policies, that you now have to go back in, sir, and master plan these communities and turn them into a complete neighborhood oriented community that is that has transit oriented districts. So in other words, you have to have a transformational, complete neighborhood, transit oriented district strategic model, which has all sorts of housing types, all sorts of industrial career path opportunities in retail, medical, education. For instance, the West Creek Village Development Project, within 5 minutes, has 10 different educational campuses within walking distance and biking distance. You know, we have this State Center College Community Campus, we have Washington Union Elementary, we have Gaston Middle School, Edison Computech, Edison High School, King Elementary, Washington Carver, on and on. But we're also building a regional retail center, and we're building low-income, affordable, mixed-use housing, on and on. So that's my answer to this question, that we have to design, master plan, complete neighborhood, transit-oriented district communities. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. Yes, and certainly, as I'm sure you're aware, your statements are very, very much in line with our regional transportation planning efforts. And you're a heck of a salesman, Mr. Hall. Thank you very much for the comment. Is there anyone else who would like to address this point? We do have 7 responses at this point. I'm going to call that very, very good. We've let this go on for about 4.5 minutes. So going once, going twice. Okay, we're going to end the poll there. So we do have 7 responses. I don't know if there's a way to provide, the information on that. I can read you some of the responses. Building up, mixed-use developments close to transit, multi-story housing. Best way to offer different types of housing choice. Apartments, townhomes, condos that are close to transit services and medical. Mixed-use density projects. More funding necessary to implement infill projects to transform vacant lots into pocket parks, community gardens. Very good. Boy, we have a lot of planning professionals on this call, clearly. We're speaking the language here. Build up, not out, and ensure the presence of green spaces. Make use of abandoned properties and buildings for housing, more mixed-use developments in different parts of the city, and inclusionary zoning. Yes, very good. Thank you. Higher density affordable housing with green space, local grocery near medical and education. So you're hearing the kind of the common thread there. I do have another comment here from Mr. Hayes. By all means, sir, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah. My apologies. I pushed the wrong button, so I wasn't able to write it in. But one of the thoughts is somebody brought up about mixed use. And I think that's a very important aspect about it. But one of the planning techniques that I've encountered, and I'm not an expert, but I have participated in these types of activities in the past, or charrettes, dealing with, right? And so it's nice to have that. But it's the whole concept of space planning based on time and dealing with jobs to housing imbalances, and how, you know, suburban development over the decades means further distance from your home to your job, and then reverse commute, and you know, the counting of trips, and then capping trips, and it goes on and on and on. But some others who are involved in urban planning and design talk about the 24 hours. What does an individual do in 24 hours, and whether or not that can be accommodated in, quote, a mixed use type of approach. And so I just wanted to share this whole thing about space planning and air rights, where today you may have, like along Blackstone Avenue as an example, single story, and that there are, quote, air rights. I don't know if COG or the county or the city of Fresno look at that, but that's another concept that's been out there for a while. So I just wanted to point those out and see if that can add value to the approach or methodology that will occur.
I'm sure that those are all considerations. You're absolutely right, Mr. Hayes. Those are all considerations that are given, especially to multi-story developments with the kinds of densities that you're talking about, air rights, you know, among them. So yeah, we do appreciate that. And again, very much, the comments very much in line with what we're hearing from everybody else, what you saw or what I read to you as part of the written comments. So again, it sounds like we have a master class in planning going on tonight, and that's terrific. So, but we do need to move it along. So why don't we go to our next question? Again, kind of an open-ended one here. So are there other eligible projects or programs that meet the goals and objectives that you would like in your community? Is there something that hasn't already been mentioned? Is something that we haven't provided an example of? What is it that we've missed? By all means, please raise your hand, or I don't know, Denise, do we have a poll for this one? We don't have a poll.
No, we don't. This is just like a feedback one that we had. Yeah.
Yeah. So if there's, I guess the point here is that we've tried to provide some examples of things that potentially could be funded under REAP 2.0, given, kind of the specific metrics that are going to be required for us to develop, as part of the methodology and eventually the guidelines. But those aren't certainly an exhaustive list of examples. You have also mentioned some. I love the notion of the pocket parks. That's a great idea. Certainly Fresno, City of Fresno has an entire tax initiative for parks that will hopefully be working toward that end as well, in addition to other recreational amenities, but that doesn't necessarily address the rest of our region, the rest of our county. So are there any other thoughts or points that you'd like to make before we close out for the night? Any other projects, concepts, anything that we haven't talked about? Okay, and Mr. Hayes, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. In the region that I'm trying to speak on behalf of and where I reside, and this is common throughout the county and elsewhere, is jobs, the housing for lower waged workers, the workforce. So if I look at what's going on right now in the Shaver Lake area, which is a very important economic resource, benefits the county, is a lot of the housing is going on the higher end and less affordable housing for the workforce to work at those resorts, work at those cafes. And the question is how that can be addressed. I know that there's discussion on the Valley floor about farm workers and having housing for them, shorten the commutes and improve the quality of life, the quality of service, so that those who come to recreate or are engaged in tourism, in this case, I won't speak on behalf of AG, I'm certain they have their representatives, but as relates to tourism and recreational opportunities, you gotta have people who don't have long commutes. And that's the thing. Over the last 10 to 20 years, there's an imbalance as it relates to the workforce. So when you say specify any other eligible uses and programs that meet REAP 2 goals and objectives, I'm putting that out there. I don't know how you want to frame it as it relates to this initiative, but I think that's a very serious challenge that we all are facing. And so representatively here in Eastern Fresno County, it is a big issue. People living in cars, the Creek Fire, things like that. Maybe Creek Fire should be also part of this conversation as well, and the recovery requirements associated with that. And that is an opportunity as well.
Well, or for example, the potential for wildfire planning efforts or infrastructure that could possibly prevent further wildfires or the severity that we've seen from examples like the Creek Fire. That would be another thought. I don't know the extent to which that is reasonable, but it's a thought.
Don't know.
Right.
Absolutely. Everything on the table.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, very good. If there are no other comments, then we're going to go ahead and move on. Uh-oh. Oh, shoot. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, can you let us know your home zip code? We do have the poll for this, do we not? Denise, yeah. So if you would just, we don't need any specific location address per se, just a quick roundup of zip codes so that we know who is represented tonight. Give you just a couple moments to respond to that. Okay, just a couple more. Just let us know where you're located in the county so that we can report that out as part of our outreach efforts. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. All right. Okay, and then our next slide. So in terms of next steps, we presented this meeting tonight. We talked about the 5:30 p.m. Wednesday, November 16th. This meeting will be broadcast on Yahoo and on Facebook. That is to say, posted on our Yahoo and Facebook channels. We will have another meeting tomorrow. Oh, it says December 13th. Did I get this mixed up, Brenda? Do we have the dates right?
That's our next round.
Oh, the next round. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So the meeting tonight and then the next round will be in mid-December. At that point, we will be coming back to you with what we believe are a set of metrics based on the information provided tonight and other input that we receive from our stakeholders groups and other, again, information from our state agency partners. We will provide you with a list of metrics that we hope to provide that will bounce off of you, ask you if these are the right, if we're measuring the right things, if we are prioritizing correctly, because that is what will eventually go into our application. So you're welcome to participate as part of our stakeholders group as well, if you're interested. On the next slide, you'll have my contact information. Our next meeting, go back for just a second, Denise. So we will be meeting again with the stakeholders on December 7th, as it says at the top. That's to inform them about the input that we received at this meeting. And then again, December 13th and December 14th for the next round, but we will have another meeting, this same presentation tomorrow at noon. So you're welcome to join us for that as well, or any of our meetings. Of course, you're absolutely welcome. And if you're not already on our mailing list now, please, last slide. There we go. So here's my personal contact information. Happy to get you onto our REAP 2.0 mailing list if you're not already there. And we will inform you about all of our upcoming meetings. We do anticipate outreach to continue beyond December 31st, because again, we have not yet received funding for this program to assist us with outreach. So we do anticipate it to continue into the next year, as especially as we move into project selection. So with that, thank you once again for attending. We really appreciate and value your time. We hope you found this session worthwhile. Again, don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions or comments. Love to hear from you. And we look forward to seeing you at our events in the near future to continue this discussion. So with that, thank you and good night.